Trump just fired his own attorney general, but what Jamie Raskin revealed about what really happened behind the scenes is far more disturbing than the firing itself.
Congressman, thanks so much for sharing your afternoon with us. First, just what's your reaction to the news that Trump ousted his attorney general?
Well, I'm afraid that the administration or the president may take the wrong message from this. I mean, her tenure was plainly a disaster, but she did everything that Donald Trump asked her to do. They sacked dozens and dozens of career attorneys just for having worked on the January 6th case. They did everything they could to obstruct the release of the Epstein files. Millions of pages of the Epstein files were withheld by Pam Bondi. They did nothing to try to crack down on the outrageous ICE tactics that were trampling people's civil rights and constitutional liberties in Minneapolis. And so she basically did everything that he asked her to do, and she shouldn't be just the fall person for a series of policies that I think are profoundly infected with unconstitutionality and illegality. So, people have been calling me saying, you must feel great because she called you a washed up loser lawyer during the hearing. And, I have no personal animus towards Pam Bondi, and I understand she was a pretty good prosecutor in Florida, and I hope she can restore her reputation. But going all the way down the road with the corruption in the administration, I think a career killer for a lot of people.
I wonder, Congressman, what you make of the timing, in part because it was only yesterday that Bondi had summoned the head prosecutor overseeing an investigation into whether former CIA Director John Brennan made false statements to Congress about a years-old intel assessment of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Our reporting indicates that Bondi was trying to communicate to that prosecutor that she believed that he was slow-walking that investigation and that she wanted to see some development in the case. Do you think that the fact that she's been fired makes it more likely that we'll see similar prosecutions in the near future?
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. She turned the Department of Justice into Donald Trump's vendetta factory. And, whether we're talking about, the FBI director, Comey, or we're talking about the New York prosecutor, Letitia James, or we're talking about members of Congress like Maggie Goodlander, they thought that their job was basically to go out and investigate and prosecute Donald Trump's chosen foes, regardless of whether or not they've done anything. And that's why, there's a record number of judges just castigating and excoriating the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, and these lawyers for their absolute improper behavior in court and outside of court. And I hope that Donald Trump doesn't continue down this road. He'll just ruin some other lawyers' careers. And it doesn't give me a lot of comfort that it's Todd Blanche, who's now the acting Attorney General of the United States. This is the guy who transferred Ghislaine Maxwell from the higher security prison to the low security prison camp in Texas, and has arranged for a very sweet landing for her there.
I do want to ask you about Blanche and potential replacements for Bondi, but one more question on her. Because she was supposed to appear on April 14th for a deposition before the House Oversight Committee. Ranking Member Garcia says that she still has to appear. James Comer, the chairman of that committee, has said that he's going to counsel with other Republicans on the panel to determine next steps. Nancy Mace, who initiated the call for Bondi to testify before them, says she still believes that it's on. But we are hearing indications from behind the scenes, including from CNN's Caitlin Collins, that part of the reason that Bondi is leaving the position is directly tied to the White House wanting to avoid her testifying before Congress. What do you make of that?
Well, a legal subpoena is a legal subpoena, and she has the responsibility and the duty to appear. It may be that Chairman Comer, in his utterly invertebrate subservience to Donald Trump and the administration, will see if he can get enough Republicans to vote to withdraw the subpoena. But I believe that my colleague, Ranking Member Garcia, is absolutely right. That subpoena is still valid, and she needs to appear.
What do you think the future is of the Epstein files investigation with Bondi now out of the picture?
Well, the president might be taking from all of this the idea that he needs a more skilled fighter on his behalf. But in fact, he should take it as a sign that the country has had enough of all of the obstructionism and all of the cover-up. We passed a law for a reason. We want every single one of those files released. We want only the names of victims redacted and not the names of the potential co-conspirators and enablers, which is what they've done. So we'll see whether they continue to dig even deeper in this betrayal of the federal law and justice. They've turned the Department of Justice into this the political law firm for Donald Trump, and they need to perform a 180-degree turnaround from that. And we'll see if there are enough cool heads in the White House to understand what's really gone wrong.
Before we go, Congressman, one final question quickly. Would you prefer Todd Blanche take on the role aside from an acting basis and be Bondi's official replacement, or perhaps your former House colleague Lee Zeldin or even Jeanine Pirro? Do any of those names resonate with you as potential replacements for Bondi?
No, they do not. All of them, again, are complete political sycophants and flunkies to Donald Trump. That was the problem in the first place. And so it's just asking another lawyer to walk the plank and sacrifice their professional reputation for Donald Trump. They should get in a real prosecutor, a real lawyer, and there are lots of good conservative ones. And a lot of them are the people who stood up to Pam Bondi in this process, including Eric Siebert, the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, who was replaced. He would make a good attorney general.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, I have some doubts that we'll see that nomination, but you never know. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.
What you just watched isn't just about someone losing their job. It's about what happens when the justice system gets pulled into the orbit of political loyalty. Because when Jamie Raskin says that Pam Bondi's tenure was plainly a disaster, he's not talking about incompetence in the traditional sense. He's making a much more serious claim that the Department of Justice was functioning exactly as intended, just not in the way it's supposed to in a democracy. And that distinction is everything. Raskin is essentially arguing that Bondi didn't fail at her job. She fulfilled a different job, one where the priority wasn't justice, but loyalty, not accountability, but protection, not the Constitution, but the political interests of one individual. Now think about what that means. Because if the Attorney General is operating as a political enforcer rather than an independent guardian of the law, then every decision coming out of that office has to be questioned. Every investigation, every prosecution, every delay, it all becomes suspect. That's why Raskin brings up the Epstein files again, tied to Jeffrey Epstein. This isn't random, it's strategic. He's pointing to a concrete example where the stakes are incredibly high, where victims have been waiting for years, and where transparency has been repeatedly delayed. If you believe in a system where no one is above the law, where victims matter, and where truth isn't filtered through political interests, then this is exactly the kind of moment you need to be paying attention to. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, don't let moments like this fade into the background. Subscribe to Blue Voice, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to understand what's really at stake, because accountability only works when people demand it.